This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine.
Hello and welcome to this month's Chthonia Conversations. I'm your host, Breach Burke. Today we have a real special treat today. I have a good friend of mine, Jeanette Hanley. Her husband, Dan, had actually done a podcast with me back in February on Gnosticism. And Jeanette and I have been very good friends for a very long time. She's a former librarian for about 20 years. And she knows a lot about, compared to me, big time, she knows a lot about horror movies. And we end up talking about this a lot. And we've also talked a lot about horror movies and their relationship to the feminine, the dark feminine. This has come up quite a bit. And I realize, Jeanette, you probably have an awful lot. You have a lot of good things to say, interesting things to say on this topic. So I wanted to bring you on and have that conversation in time for Halloween this year. So welcome. Good to have you.
Hi, thank you for having me on, Miss Bridget. Yeah, I just love them. I've loved them since I was a kid, and I'll get into that a little bit if you want. But it wasn't until the past couple years that I realized how much they've been like medicine for me, and how much they made me feel just when I was feeling upset or sad or down or scared, that they gave me a sense of calm or relaxation, whether it's seeing the people survive or relating to the monster sometimes, depending on the movie, or time I spent with loved ones, family or friends, and got introduced to them that way. I am retired as a librarian now, although I'm not in retirement.
Right, exactly. I understood. Yes.
I had no choice because of my illness. And so horror movie, I've just started getting back into them in a more, because I couldn't really go out a lot or I can't do much. I watch a lot of them, and then I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and started making me realize how much horror movies affected my life, and thinking more about right, I watch a lot of these. Like when you try to separate, as a librarian, I try to separate my DVDs and Blu-rays into like subjects. I'm like, wait, why am I separating Halloween movies or scary movies? It's like 80% of my collection. Okay, something is going on. Like I never thought, because maybe, and this will be connected, I think in my head, because, and I don't know why I thought this. I'm not going to say it was society at large or a larger group, but in my head, sometimes maybe I thought because I wasn't a guy, or because I wasn't into the more extreme stuff. And I'm not saying that any guy ever said that to me. That's not what happened. It was just maybe some sort of internalized idea. I don't know. But I wasn't a big horror fan because I wasn't into extreme stuff. And then I realized I was. And then I started to hear more and more people talking. It was my mother, when I was a kid. She would watch a lot of them at night. And then I had an older cousin. When I was staying, I would spend time with my aunt, or I stayed there for prolonged periods. He would take us all to the video store, and then we would sit up, or we watch movies on cable, and he would make a bunch of snacks or buy us a bunch of snacks, and we'd all stay up late and watch them. Or he was the one that took us to see The Lost Boys, and I saw it in a nice like little theater, and it was a shore town where I saw it, actually, so it was perfect because my aunt had lived, well, she lived off, she didn't live in the shore town, but she lived like very close to it. You could get to the shore in a half an hour, less than that. And
well, I think in the shore areas, there's actually a lot of theaters that show a lot of stuff like that,
Right. And well, it was everywhere when I saw it. It was actually coming out in the theaters. It was
right.
That's when it was popular. Yeah, that's actually was. There were more small theaters around. There wasn't many multiplex. So I forget what year that it was. Whatever year the Lost Boys came out. And yes, I am a huge Lost Boys fan, but I just can't remember what year it came out now. So nobody come at me.
It's fine. It's all good.
In the horror community, it's okay.
It's that's interesting. Because I also think about the fact that the horror movies that were on television, because like I said, I haven't watched quite as many, as you know from talking to me, and it's kind of weird given what I'm into and what I'm interested in. It's funny that I'm not actually a big horror movie watcher. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like
that's interesting too, because you're into some darker stuff than I am when it comes to writing or reading. Really, stuff that I'd be like, oh, it's okay, Bridget, no, I'm all
No thanks. Yeah, right. But then again, you watch certain
Which is a
movies
huge
and I'm like,
compliment
yeah,
to
Jeanette,
myself.
okay, it's fine. I don't need to really
Yeah.
see that. So it's
Yeah.
weird. I don't know. I think you know what it is. I'm more of I like reading stuff. I don't
Uh-huh.
necessarily like want somebody visualizing it for me. So that might be more what it is in my case.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I do recall like growing up like in the 80s and stuff. And I think Lost Boys came out in the 80s. I want to say it was
It
late
did come
80s.
out in the 80s. I just forget what
What
year
exact year?
it
Yeah.
was. I just can't look. Oh, 87. Or is that 82?
87. That sounds about right.
That's 87. Yeah, that sounds right.
87.
The age I was when my cousin took us.
Oh wow, the year I got involved in well, actually I think I got witchcrafted the year before that. But anyway, yeah, that's right around that time. It's kind of funny. But I remember
Yeah.
when the movie came out. But I'd also remember the whole thing like USA Night Flight and all that stuff, where they had the like if you were up at 2, 3 in the morning, like or really late, like after midnight, they had all
Yeah.
these movies on.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, also, yeah, that would be that too. Yeah. If I was in my room when I was a kid, I just had like a small black and white TV in my room. I
right.
didn't have a big TV. We would call the one in the living room the big TV, and then we would have like little T. I had a little small
Yes.
portable black and white that I could bring back and forth. So if it was on late at night or whatever, or later on when we got cable, I mean, we struggled financially. We were, my cousin taking us to the movies was a different thing. That wasn't my mother. Um, so we
Mhm.
struggled financially, but she was able to get us cable, and it was easy. And since there was at that point there was no movie theater in my town anymore, and we didn't drive, so we couldn't get to one.
Right.
So when I was very little, we had a movie theater. Then they got rid of them. So
Mhm.
she used to take me when we were really little. I remember
Mhm.
seeing Grease in the movie theater, and then the movie theater went away, and she couldn't take us. And then when the video stores came around on cable, she found ways to make that happen, and so that was
Yeah.
always nice. It just
Like when I grew up, yeah, my father was very much and it's funny because my father just passed away like 2 weeks ago, and it was just but I remember growing up like in 1981 even like he had to have cable. It was like it had to be in the house. And so yeah, I probably saw a lot more things than I would have
and they
because
were
my
giving
mother.
a lot of deals out at that point because they were trying to grow the company.
Right. And it was and yeah, and that was the time when you had the little slide bar, you had the old boxes and everything.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
yep. And so yeah, so there was a lot of like weird stuff on that you wouldn't have normally seen on just the regular.
No, there was tons of crazy stuff that you wouldn't have seen in
Yes.
the theaters. Or
Exactly.
only ran for 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, and or maybe see there wasn't such a thing as direct to VHS or direct to DVD at
Not
that
yet,
time.
no, not yet.
That was like
no.
a new thing. We still had a Betamax. I mean, it was like, oh my god.
Yeah, we got our VCR was given to us as a gift.
Yep.
It was a family from a family member, and also actually the reason we got our first video store membership, it was $20. I think it was doing a new store, and we got a lifetime membership for $20, which I think the lifetime was much more expensive later on.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother found $20 on the street, and there was no one around. It wasn't in a wallet or anything. So
wow. So there you go. You were meant to have that.
Yeah.
It was kind of there's kind of a destiny thing there. I think. So okay. So what we want to kind of talk about a little bit is as you know, of course, we talk at Chthonia. I know you listen to this podcast. It's kind of obviously I focus on the dark feminine, right? And so one of the things you and I have talked about a lot is the way in which that ends up kind of being portrayed in horror movies. But I think I want to take a step back and just ask you, first thing is just talking about, because I know you and I've talked a lot about the ways in which women tend to be portrayed in horror movies. Like there's always tends to be certain tropes that follow female characters in particular. So I don't know, obviously you can't cover every single one and every single nuance, but just kind of like in general, what's your impression of that? Like what's your thought?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is this has to be said a couple things I'm about to say have to be said if you talk about horror, especially since I spent as much time. I spent a lot of time listening to the horror community. I'll say, first of all, I'm definitely no expert. I have no degrees in horror. I don't work in horror. So there may be people who've made their life study know a lot more than me. This is just my life experience.
No worries. Your experience is just as good as far as I'm concerned.
And of course, this is just my opinion, and these are my observations, and it means nothing on what anyone else should think or feel or do, because especially with horror, I think people have to be given the room to get whatever they want out of it, because it's about feeling. So I want to make sure I say that. Now, what I'm also going to say is it's interesting to me when we talk about tropes or types or what have you, because I think it is my observation or my feeling that these things came later on before horror got big. Now, of course, that makes sense because you develop tropes or patterns. You develop patterns as you continue to do something. And I think that came from from my observation, it's like kind of been like just people's idea of what they saw, like patterns they thought they saw in the movie or whatever, but is not sometimes really there in the original. That is not to say that I'm saying anyone's wrong, but it's just wasn't always there in a way that people feel like people may assume they were, or observed, have been told that they were. And that is not to say that they're wrong. It's just my observation. I've said that like 3 times. Okay. So it's funny. I have Halloween in the background on mute. So I'm just one of my favorites.
So just this idea of women, right?
This can be a touchy subject. Okay, so what is said is that, a lot of times they show good girl or bad girl or sexually promiscuous girl,
right,
or just a body, meaning for a kill count or what have you.
Sure.
And to bring the body count up in a slasher or something like that, which I love slashers. But one of the things people talk about is somehow going back that they talk about more often, which may not actually chronologically be the first one, but can be the first one I've seen or someone else has seen, is like Halloween, okay, or even Friday the 13th. And a lot of times I feel like, and I think I hope this answers it, that there is people are being punished for having sex, but yet with Laurie being, spoiler alert for Halloween, the original, spoiler alert. Okay.
Yes.
But anyway, where, Laurie survives, or spoiler alert for Friday the 13th, the original, I just forgot her name. Alice survives, and I think it's interesting when people realize that this isn't Laurie or Alice either weren't pursuing sex or didn't engage in sex.
Right.
And the thing is, but really it was because they weren't distracted. And it's not me trying to come up with some sort of idea out of my own head, or to make an excuse for movies or to put a spin on it that makes me feel better as a female for watching them. But Laurie just wasn't distracted. And this is actually something along the lines of what Deborah Hill says in the commentary for Halloween. And I could be misquoting her, but it was odd to her that people thought that she was punishing them. Well, they were being punished because that was never her intention. And she wrote a lot of most of the female dialogue, if not all, I don't know. And, and with Friday the 13th, I don't know what they say the intention was, but I don't think that was it. But it was just that, Alice just wasn't distracted or doing something else. And actually, in Friday the 13th, there's only 2 people, like in the first original, having sex, and it's implied that another couple was having sex when Jason dies. Spoiler alert, many years before. And I did it. Now, while I felt Mrs. Voorhees was punishing them, I felt for having sex because she's blaming them for not paying attention.
Right.
I didn't feel like the writers were punishing them. I felt like sometimes the people who come in and do the punishing are the people that are wrong, not so much at first. It being presented as, they're immoral, they need to be punished. But somehow people noticed that, and that's how it became a trope, and then that started happening more often. I think the reason I say that is because I think that Deborah Hill never wanted to show that. It was important to her. So she was a young, smart woman making a movie in the 70s, and she was a child of that time and wanted to be free and open. And I don't think that she felt like sex was something that needed to be punished. But there were outside forces that may have felt that way. And sometimes we do feel it. We can think about that in these earlier ones, about someone coming in and trying to ruin a good time. But later later on because people just started to see it, but there are things happening also. So if you're told for so long, okay, this is what happens and these are the tropes, then you believe it because you didn't. And then if you kind of go back after watching so many other and you watch other ones, you're like, well, wait a second, it's not what really happened. These are just a couple of some young people hanging out, you know.
Well, right, exactly. And I think that's one thing we've talked about quite a bit is that there definitely tends to be this moralistic slant of like, oh, all the kids who are having sex are the ones who are going to get murdered. You know what I mean? Or who are going to get killed
later on. Yeah, that does occur.
Right. And actually even, okay, like I'm thinking about like certain even like demon possession movies, like, like Knights of the Demon, stuff like that, where it's like, the good girl is the quote unquote good girl is the one who survives. And the ones who are like the bad girls who are doing all the bad things, they all get possessed and then they all get thrown into hell or whatever.
Yeah. Now, here's interesting about Night of the Demons. It's very interesting if you watch it because the girl that survives, someone's implying she's a virgin. She was a virgin because she had been a virgin. She never confirms that. And it's kind of like left in the air. It is never confirmed that she's a virgin. It's almost as if she actually is not.
But the characterization almost makes it seem like she is, right?
No, that's why I don't understand. She's a nice girl.
Yes, okay.
But they're making out, and the guy assumes she was, but she never decided she was. Now, it's been probably about 8 months to a year since I've seen it, and I could rewatch it.
Right.
But I kind of got, she is a nice girl, and she is sweet, and she is kind. The other people are assholes.
Yeah, right. Like, but that's just it. The quote unquote nice girl, right?
Or I see. I shy away from that because I feel like it goes along with this idea that all early horror movies projected people in this very specific what's the word? I can't think of it right now. Like
stereotyped.
Yeah, that's not the word I'm looking for, but that works.
Okay.
And she kind of implies like that she's, from what I remember, that she just doesn't say that she actually is. You know?
No, it's not stated out loud. No.
And her and the guy that are good people. See, that's the way I think they're when you say good girl or nice girl and you're saying nice people, it has two, right? That has two totally different connotations.
That's true. Right. Does that mean does that mean sexually, or does that just mean you're a nice person?
Now later on, other movies do start taking on this idea, and that's why they even bring it up in Scream, and stuff like that. That she's, she ends up like she does end up having sex, and Sydney doesn't die. Spoiler alert for Scream. Yeah. Scream is a whole nother another franchise that I love, and Wes Craven. Wes Craven. I love Wes Craven. I love him. He made some really dark movies in his early time, and then he made these. He made Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream, which are dark. Some people would see dark, but the stuff he made earlier on was very, very dark, and they're not my type of movies at all. But sometimes I think it's interesting. It was like this balancing out he did with female characters.
Okay.
Creating Sydney and Nancy and any other hero. Well, he when it came to Elm Street, he was dealing with Nancy. That's a whole big old franchise, and anything he did, Nancy was in. So.
Okay.
I'm kind of baffling. I'm going around a lot. Do you still want me to get? I haven't gotten the tropes yet, have I?
Well, yeah, if you could, please. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so when you're getting into people writing with a formula, at some point they start writing with a formula. You can see in a lot of movies that there's the idea that people just develop the idea that the nice girl or the girl who hadn't engaged in sex, or girls who did, or females who did, or females who were smart or cared about their looks too much. There are these different categories,
right?
That they were put in, and I think that a lot of that happened was because that were some people's understanding of the genre, or because people knew it was an easy formula to create and sell.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are some, the best friend. It gets developed more and more. A great movie that kind of covers this is I think it's called Cabin in the Woods.
Okay.
And,
I think I've heard of it. Yes.
Yeah, and it's about tropes. And there's so much in it that, like, if someone hasn't seen it, I don't even want to get anywhere near spoiling it. But it starts off with no one being like anything like you would expect people to be in a horror movie, and eventually they become like them, and you find out why.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's probably one that's worth watching for people who are interested. Yeah. So so that's interesting because I know.
Like in Texas Chainsaw, sorry, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of my absolute favorites. The original, the 1973, 1974 one. The reason I'm forgetting the time is because you hear different years, and obviously I could look it up and get the right year. Even if I say it's my favorite, I should know. But
it's the late 70s. Yeah, it's late 70s.
Yeah, it's early 70s, 73, 74.
Oh, is it? Okay. For some reason I think of it as later, but okay.
I think it's 73, but I probably want it to be 73 because I was born in 73. So,
okay.
So, nobody has sex.
Right.
Nobody. And it's so strange because it's like, that's not what happens there. Like, they go onto this person's property and all these other things happen and there's all these other reasons involved, but that's not why, yeah. So
and it's interesting because with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think like what I've read about like the backdrop and the commentary and stuff is that there's kind of like that was like a post-Vietnam War thing.
That's correct. Yeah. You can't forget about when it comes to these movies from the 70s era, the entire era of the 70s, but even in the early 80s, you cannot forget about post-Vietnam. You cannot forget about people being in Vietnam. You cannot forget about these people coming back, these soldiers coming back, or the way it affected families, the way it affected the children that they were raising later on. The fact that it was on the TV screens. Like, it was just on your news. These people, young people and parents were seeing images we don't see now unless we choose to.
Okay.
So they were seeing a lot of gore, a lot of horror, and it was just.
But that's just it. Then it becomes like a butchery. It becomes like a bloodbath. Yeah.
So, people were seeing this, and you had a lot of people coming back who had seen it. A lot of people who were soldiers at points were involved in these movies. Like Tom Savini, was the way he created great special effects because he had seen this stuff. I would keep hearing these people like, yeah, well, I came back from Vietnam. Reggie Bannister is it in Phantasm, which stuff like that. Phantasm.
Okay.
One of Dan's like top 3 favorite franchises. That and Hellraiser.
Okay, right. And now there's actually, speaking of, isn't there a Hellraiser now that's gonna have a female spinhead? Yeah.
It was so good. And the original is so great, and the book is so great, and Clive Barker. Okay, here, I'll bring it back. Yeah, Clive Barker is really great at writing female characters. So excellent. I think if you can write that character, write it, and the stuff, the book itself, the movie, Clive Barker is just so good. Some just in the way that way back in the day, S.E. Hinton could write some really great stories that portrayed boys. Boys living together. I think Clive Barker is just amazing, and the reason I say that is because we're talking about the feminine and the way that he talks about the dark feminine, Clive Barker. And because his focus really, he wanted to show Julia as what a villain she was and how awful she was. It's really gross and gory. You shouldn't watch it.
Okay.
So we should point out that I'm always telling you, Bridget, this is great, this happened, but don't watch it.
Don't watch this, but let me tell you what happens. Yeah.
I'm good like that. I am really good. I will tell someone this happened. These are the things that might bug you. That's the thing, you got to know your limits with horror.
Right.
It's good to be able to bring yourself to the brink,
Mm-hmm.
And say, this is what I want to do. This is it. But this is too much. That's not enjoyable for me.
Right.
And it's okay. And that can change throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Absolutely.
think that's when we're talking about the idea of darkness and shadow and stuff. It's like, what am I working through and what am I ready to? Or what am I enjoying and what I can't? It's supposed to be fun. There's no
Mm-hmm.
other reason to watch TV or movies unless you have to do it for a job, is just to have fun. If you're not having fun, stop doing it.
No, that's exactly a very good point, because it's there's a lot of examination. Like, I just did actually a presentation for the Dark Goddess Festival, and one of the things I'm talking about is the way in which people deal with the underworld, the Chthonia, the scary, the demonic, and things like that, and the way in which like when I write, as I don't. We had this discussion too at one point. I said I never put trigger warnings in anything, which I know now that's a thing that people do. Like, that's kind of a normal thing, and but it's also like, yeah, but of course, although I think when you're reading something on print, it's a little different than looking at it on the screen.
That's right.
And there's just some things that I don't know. It's not that it's weird. It's like that you look at it and it's like, part of me is like repelled, like, I don't want to watch this. And part of me can't look away either. You know what I mean?
Right? Yeah, I've had that experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with the thing about having trigger warnings is I actually appreciate those because
Mhm.
there's certain things I don't want to see, and I in the past I thought because of that meant I wasn't a horror fan or whatever, and it's not really the case, because a lot of horror fans have that. They'll talk about that or they'll look for them, and you could find websites where people have actually done it themselves. Like, they might read your book and say, okay, well, this isn't here, so if that's going to be too much for you, just know that it's in there. And so if you're prepared for it, or another book, it doesn't stop me from reading something that I'm going to read anyway, but it lets me know, okay, well, that's just not for me. Now, I'm not trying to make you feel that. I think it's interesting because I think for some women or some people, I don't mean that, because I'm thinking in my mind as a woman, and I want to talk about everyone's experience. For some people, having access to that is reassuring. It's not because I'm so afraid and I need to be tiptoed around, or I'm going to be angry at anyone for not telling me, or how dare they say this, and they shouldn't be talking about this. And then for some people, having to put that, it's like, well, why are you saying I can't talk about these things?
Right.
You're giving me this and you're saying I can't talk about these things. So I think when people sometimes have negative reactions to not getting them and negative reactions to giving them, having to give them, sometimes that actually has to do with our own experience in talking about darkness and things that scare us.
Absolutely.
Or being around darkness. It's just like, well, what if you grew up around a lot of violence, or you have a lot of serious trauma? I know people who have some serious trauma. They're not hiding in the corners and asked to be treated with, tender gloves in life. They just know what sets them off.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, people who have trauma, if it's not properly treated, if you're freaking out, you could get angry at someone else. Something else could happen. You might not just internalize it. So You don't want to mess up your day or someone else's day. And I'm not saying that people who have trauma are going to go out and hurt people and cause massive violence. I'm just talking about my own experience, but people so it's just like, it's good to know, because it's an actual mental health issue. It's not something, there's a difference between, well, you shouldn't make me talk about this, and you shouldn't make me, and I have to exist in a perfectly happy, clean, pure environment where no one bothers me. That's not what everyone who wants those warnings is saying. We're saying, no, this really is bad for me. This is bad for my mental health. And I think I'm going into one thing and I'm going to something else. That could be really bad for me, And then for other people who are like, well, I was in a situation where no one told me, I wasn't allowed to talk. I had no voice. And I've seen that too. I mean, both arguments are good, So, and I think if you're brought into a situation where you're dealing with your own scary parts, or thoughts or experiences, it can be more damaging to not have it respected that it's a treacherous and soft walk for you than it can be it can cause you more damage to not have those warnings, or not be prepared, or go too soon.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Understood.
That's just my experience.
Because actually, what I had another thing I wanted to ask about, and that was, okay, so we've kind of talked about the way that women tend to be portrayed, or the type of characters that or tropes that tend to appear in horror movies. Now, one thing you and I've talked about more specifically is the dark feminine in horror movies.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and obviously, as we know, the dark feminine, that's this idea of these kind of, it doesn't necessarily always have to be villainous, but there's this idea of this feminine that's threatening. Either it's cannibalistic, or it's castrating, or it's just destructive in some form. Like, it's not the woman as maternal, or the woman as, the compassionate loving one, or the woman as, the woman who is somebody, and sometimes it's not even any of that. Sometimes it's just the woman who is way too independent and is a threat, kind of a thing. How do you feel like that gets treated in horror, just in your opinion, from what you've seen?
Well, I think that it's changing, but I think that in the past there's sometimes where it was portrayed in a way that maybe like in a lot of demonic possession movies, for some reason it always had to be like, a lot of the time, except for The Exorcist, of course, except where it was appropriate, like all of a sudden this woman becomes over sexual. Like, that means she's possessed because she wants it. It's just like,
right. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Exist, and I always felt like a lot of times in the past, I think that that's changing, and I can't give you specific examples right now, but I think that would happen. I think maybe that, I think it's something about maybe the fear of. Can you repeat it a little bit? I'm sorry, my brain.
No, that's okay. It's just like, the way in which the dark feminine is treated often in horror movies.
Yeah. There's always seems to be a lot of times that there's a sexual tone to it, which I've said, and also, I have to say that maybe it doesn't bother me. Maybe I kind of enjoy it. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what it is. I just like seeing women do messed up stuff and go crazy, and instead of just like a guy monster, it's a female monster, and I like that. So maybe that's why I'm having a struggle with it. Sometimes in the way it was portrayed, in the past, it was like, it would be over sexualized. I'd be like, okay, whatever. Which don't have a problem with all the time, but sometimes when it's just stupid or it's badly done. And of course later on, specifically, like, there's the, like, either like the friend who's nasty or mean, has to be hurt and killed. But see, that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about the female as the monster, right?
Well, any way in which the female is portrayed in that kind of dark, you know what I mean? Like, not the good girl.
Okay, all right, yeah. Well, like a friend who's mean or nasty, so you want her to die. You want her to get killed because she's sexually aggressive, or she's insulting, or she's rude, or she insults you or yells at you for, like, being, into school, like what happens to Lori or whatever. Like, her friend Annie is, like, portrayed as, like, having an attitude or being, like, snippy or whatever, but she's one of my favorite characters, because there's this point at which they're driving and she finally gets Laura to admit that she likes Ben Tramer, and if you watch it real close, like, Annie's just like, see, I knew, like, she's happy for her, but Annie just has like she has a very dark personality, and she's that friend that you've had where people are like, why do you hang out with her? She's not very nice. I'm like, that's just how she talks, but she's actually nice.
Right, exactly. And
I'm sure people will come up with all reasons why I'm wrong, but that's okay.
Well, it's and interesting though. What you brought up about the sexualization. Yeah. The way what you brought about sexualization. I remember I was reading something, and I actually think I wrote part of a paper on this, but it was the idea, like, okay, like movies. Okay, Exorcist is a good example. Like even something like Rosemary's Baby, or even something like, what was it? I don't know if it was, what was the heck it was called? It was the woman. It was like the alien woman who was impregnating people. It was like Species or something like that.
Oh yeah, I don't think I've seen it, but yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there's this idea of this female, like when you talk about the monstrous female, you either kind of have this kind of either like, okay, I've seen kind of like three different things. There's sort of like the hag that like steals children, the sort of either cannibalistic hag, or the hag that's a witch that's going to I don't know, somehow demonically possess or destroy or something, somebody. Oftentimes we're dealing with either younger people or children. And then I've also seen with the sex thing, it's like yeah, like okay, like somebody had pointed out, I think it was this guy with the book Holy Terror, I can't remember, but it was about I don't know if it was Holy Terror, it was another one. It might have been called Monsters in America. I think W. Scott Poole, that's the book. And he was talking about how like in the late 60s when birth control became like a thing, like birth control became a thing for women, and then the church had to put out this encyclical about the value of the family or whatever. And it just seems like a lot of these movies, even The Exorcist, like if you look at Reagan and her mother's a single mother, she's successful on her own, she has this daughter, and her daughter, right at the time she's at puberty, what does she do? She starts playing with a Ouija board and stuff, right? Like she's into witchy shit,
play with
right?
the Ouija board unless you know what you're doing. By the time you're ready and prepared to play with a Ouija board and have enough occult knowledge to play with a Ouija board safely, you're not interested, and you're no longer interested in playing with a Ouija board.
Yeah, right. It's weird. It's kind of like, that's a whole other tangent, right?
But I'm just gonna go outside and lick a telephone pole. Oh, I just showed my age. I'm just gonna go outside and lick a sidewalk. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. But my point is that what they're portraying her in the movie, it's like that's their definition of witchcraft. We know that the definition of witchcraft is different from that, but it's just
absolutely.
But like it's this idea that suddenly she's involved in occult things with her single mother who's on her own and sexually independent, and then what does she do? She becomes possessed by this demon, right?
Right.
And what his argument was he felt like a lot of this came out of the idea that if you let a woman be liberated sexually, that somehow you're unleashing this kind of demon. You're unleashing this kind of demonic thing that's going to now The Spawn. That's the movie. That's the one I'm thinking of. It's like, that you have this woman. It's almost like she's like Lilith on steroids. You know what I mean? Like this woman where sex is used in this way that it becomes it becomes a trope for like a moralistic tale as to why women need to be under control of something or someone, whether it be religion, whether it be a man, whether it be.
What article was this? I'm sorry.
This is from a book called Monsters in America by W. Scott Poole. I can always send you this. I can actually might have the chapter. I can always send it to you. It's interesting. But anyway, it's just that it's not even so much about what's in the chapter, but just more this idea that these movies might be kind of portraying this. And I don't know. I mean, I'm just kind of talking about another way in which I've seen
heard things, but I've heard like musings on that. I've heard ideas on that, and it is possible, especially since they needed to consult with the church for an understanding of how these things are actually done. So it is possible that heavy influence was there, and he was the writer's a big Catholic, right? Not a big Catholic as in he's a large man who's a Catholic. So he's really into Catholicism, obviously, right? And then I don't remember about the director, but I mean, I think that I think it's interesting because I think these things make their way into the movies only because they're in society's head.
Absolutely, absolutely, head. Yes. So,
that's a reading that someone could get off of it. Now, if I wanted to, I could probably sit here and also be like, this is about fathers should think about what happens if they abandon their children. They don't pay attention to their children. They don't see them when they say they're going to go see them because he's supposed to see her and he doesn't go see her. He's supposed to pay attention to her and he doesn't. Well, this is what happens when you neglect your child. So I could sit here and I could come up with a reason. Not that I'm arguing against this guy because I'm not. Because I think that he probably has a point, especially considering some of the source. That's not to say to any Exorcist fan that I hate The Exorcist and I think it's anti-woman. I love The Exorcist. It's a great movie. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. It's not against it, but I feel like it's a social commentary is what it is. And it's not, and I don't even know that the director is necessarily trying to push that moral, but they may be, in a way, they may be almost spoofing on the moral, if you know what I'm saying. If that, maybe spoof isn't the right word, but they might be.
Know. Yeah, I don't know if that they're doing that. I think that if it was on purpose and they were trying to do that, then that's interesting, and maybe I'll re-listen to the commentary to see if that's the case, because now you got my interest piqued, But and I think it's a good commentary. I can't remember. Maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. I can't remember. Dan, I listened to the commentary on his own, and he mentioned it. But uh, sometimes people create stuff too, and they don't even consciously think about it like that. That's in their head. They write the story, and they don't think it out of their head. Like, oh, well, I don't think women should be divorced on their own because bad things can happen to children or whatever.
No, you're right. And that's actually another very good point, because a lot of times we write things like, I just finished a novel called Queen of Hell, right?
Right.
And when I go back and reread it, I mean, it's just an idea that came into my head. Yeah, thank you. It's not particularly meant to be about, but when I go back and reread it, especially like I said, in light of certain things that have happened to me recently, I'm like, it has nothing to do with me at all. It has nothing to do with my situation, but there's certain things, like certain neglect themes that I've seen, either in what I perceive in myself or what I perceive in other people that I know. And I'm like, this is kind of addressing that, but it's not like, when I wrote it, that was not the intention. You know what I mean?
Right. So that could be there, and they might have even intended that, or they could think that and be like, and they're not thinking there's anything wrong in it. And one could definitely have that kind of read for if they are, if they strongly feel that women should not be independent and they should not raise children on their own. And if they're religious, they should be devout. They shouldn't be divorced. They think of a certain way. That you could definitely see that. And that could actually absolutely be an intention or a spoof on the intention. But one of the things I've learned to do as a for me a female, who's, how can I say this? Who grew up, was raised by a single mother, who grew up under a lot of economic stress, who was severely bullied, who has a facial disfigurement, because I have neurofibromatosis, who's now a chronically ill person, someone who's, who's grew up in a predominantly white area when I was a kid, as a half Puerto Rican, from my father's side. I say all this meaning, like, I felt like horror was a way for me to, like, when I felt rejected, to find a home. But I'm saying I had to make things my own. So if I didn't see myself represented, and I know people don't like that word, but that's okay, because it means just seeing yourself and connecting to a piece of work, art, or music, or that's all it means when I say that. Right, I'm not trying to give anyone any crap, So I had to bring my own story out of it anyway. So if the people who were being hired maybe weren't, like, didn't know my stories, or didn't know my kind of people, or didn't appreciate or respect single mothers or whatever, I had to ignore that and find something else in the story anyway.
Sure.
So I have to be like, whatever, like, I shouldn't. Okay, I won't play with the Ouija board. Although I did when I was a teenager, of course, because I was.
I think we all did. Yeah.
We all play. It's like some demon somewhere has some sort of thing set up, so they can
Yeah, really.
Like, get them at that age, because they're, like, stupid. I mean, I was stupid. I don't know.
Well, no, I think a lot of to me, Ouija boards, I kind of have a mix. My own personal view is just kind of mixed, because on the one hand, if you don't understand something and you don't know how open you are, don't mess around. But on the other hand, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, there's certain things from my playing around with it that might not have happened if I didn't. So I don't know.
It's just, but I think you're an exception to the rule.
Could be. I think, and probably most people don't actually have anything happen at all, to be fair.
Because you're very open to the unbelievable, but you're also very smart about it.
Right. Right. No, exactly. I don't necessarily just take everything at face value, but it's, that's a separate subject that I won't get into, but I did have I had some really weird, like, teenage experiences.
I feel like I keep going off topic, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I've heard, and people doing things unconsciously. I'm not going to say subconsciously or whatever, because I actually don't know how to use those words properly, because I don't have any training in that field. So I'll just say not realizing it. I've heard directors, like, who've made movies. And I'm not going to say specifically who or whatever, because I don't remember exactly when they said it, so I don't want to be inaccurate. But in, like, in documentaries or docuseries or podcasts about horror, I'm like, oh wait, I just made so and so a title, or so and so a title. Big horror directors, like, I didn't realize I was doing that, and they remade a movie. So meaning, like, there are things in your head, or right, or people being, talking about the dark feminine about one director who someone who was involved in the first Friday the 13th saying, well, my therapist said that actually, maybe I was hoping that I had a mother who would go out and do something like this to avenge me,
You're
and,
right.
and stuff like that. But also having my husband say, that movie scared the hell out of me. My mom had a haircut and looked like that when I was a kid.
It's like, Mom, is that you? Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, so interesting. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, because we've been talking a bit about
like sticking to it. I tangent.
No, that's fine. This is meant to be an informal conversation. It's not meant to be. But the other thing I was interested in was, and you and I talked about this too, because you watched some of these, and I'm not going to remember what it's called now. You'll know. But where they'll talk with people who are female actors, the actresses who or actors. I guess actor is the word for everybody now, right?
Like docuseries or documentaries or podcasts. Yeah.
Right, and about with the women who have been in horror movies.
Yeah.
And the way in which these female actors might be treated as professionals. I know that's another thing.
I've heard a few actresses talk on different. Now I'm not saying this as evidence. I'm saying this as my experience. So I don't want to be like anecdotal. But I mean, excuse me, and I apologize ahead of time for being anecdotal. That's what I really want to say. But there is I think it was on. It might now if I'm wrong. But might have been that was on Netflix. There was a docuseries about movies that made us, and they did do one on Friday the 13th. And one of the actresses was talking about dealing with family members who didn't approve of what she did, or not being able to get hired for other more serious jobs at that time. So a lot of times people wouldn't treat them with respect because people somehow look down on horror movies, which kind of baffles me because you have to have intelligence to write stuff, these types of things. You have to have intelligence to work cameras, do all these things. And it's like we put ourselves in these categories. It's like, well, I'm an intellectual, so I don't like that. And I'm this person, and I don't like this. But that doesn't mean that someone who's doing this is not smart. And even if they're not as smart as you, it doesn't A, mean they're not smart at all, or B, they don't deserve respect.
Right.
And I felt, so a lot of sometimes there was nudity involved in these movies, which some of the women did, and sometimes it wasn't. But they were treated badly because of it. But I don't feel like I don't know if I feel like the men were treated as badly. Now, someone could argue that. That's fine. I probably will not argue back with them because I don't have the energy all the time.
Right.
Right. That's one I know of, and I've heard other actresses talk about that, But funny enough, a lot of actresses or actors too, and male actors, or let's just say people in horror films, that's probably a better way to say it as well, were in soap operas too, because they could work quick, they can memorize quick. What does that tell you? If someone can memorize things quick, can understand what you want, and know how to do it, it takes intelligence.
That's true.
Discipline. And those are both two genres that aren't always respected. I will say that a lot of times women who are involved in horror and also have been involved in either women who are involved in horror who've also been involved in either the sex industry or have been dancers or what have you, which is also an aspect of the sex industry, are sometimes bullied by other women online who feel like they are perpetuating a standard that's unattainable, or a standard or a way of portraying themselves that the other women don't feel like is something that provides other women or women with equality and makes them look like we're only here to be sexual objects.
Right. Okay.
And sometimes women who are in the horror and who do that get bullied by other women online very badly. And I have heard of a couple instances and that were really bad, and it's clothed. It is clothed and draped in, I'm doing this because I'm looking out for you and I'm caring about you, and they will let loose with horrible things.
Okay, that's
And
interesting. Yeah.
so, or somehow try and find pictures of these women at their worst.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what they really look like, meaning, and of use the excuse of, well, I'm fighting for a cause
Right.
because I don't think women should be portrayed as sexual beings. And then it's like, you're no different from some guy saying, well, she's not hot enough, you
Yeah,
know?
right, exactly. No, you're right. It's the
So,
same on both sides, right?
right. It's no different. So I feel like, you know, sometimes women who are in her industry and also in the sex industry, because there's a crossover too, or who women in the 80s and stuff who were going, without their clothes or going nude, well, without their clothes or nude, the same thing, but
Yeah, right.
sometimes looked down upon now, but it wasn't a thing. If it was a thing to you when you were forced into it, it's a different thing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But if you didn't care about that, then it's not a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
and you were paid for it. Sex work is real work, and being sexualized is part of sex work, can be considered part of sex work, and it's just work. People have a right to be in these jobs, and I think that is a problem as women when we don't support women because we don't think that they're being good girls.
Yeah, and exactly.
So
That's
it's like, well, wait a second. And there's a big conversation now in feminism and in horror about this. It's just like, well, wait a second.
mm-hmm.
So it's kind of turning a little bit. It's just like, well, if that's what she wants to do with her body, she should be able to do that.
No, exactly. And thank you. That's actually kind of the point I think I was trying to get to. With that.
Good.
That's where I wanted to get to because that's a point I've been making in others. Like when I had my conversation with Jessica Grota about Hetera, we kind of went in that direction. I don't think she expected I was going to go in that direction either. But it was like, but no, but that's just it. Part of what I'm seeing is like that relationship to sex. And you're right. It's not just the men who are bullying the women saying, oh, you're not hot enough. It's like, it's also this bullying of like, you should respect yourself more as a woman or something. And it's like, well, but on the other hand, then it becomes like, I mean, first of all, in horror movies, when you're an actress and you're just playing a role, there's all kinds of people, and there's more mainstream movies that are not technically horror where women do that, who are perfectly, A-list mainstream actresses, let's just say, right? And so there's this kind of thing, but it's just very interesting. And I think that's kind of where it ties in with the tropes, because sometimes you will have, like, I'll hear about movies that, like, I'm just talking about really crappy movies now, not like the good horror that you're talking about, but you'll have this really crappy horror where people, where it's just kind of like, okay, we're just going to show like two girls making out just because it has nothing to do with the plot, but let's just throw it in there. You know what I mean? Or yeah.
For the record, just so my if any of my horror friends hear me, I love a lot of crappy horror. So
I do too. I'm not writing it off, but it's just, but you know what I'm saying? It's like, I've heard this criticized by other people, and it's just like, they're just kind of like, yeah, that was in there, and it was like, had no relevance whatsoever, but it's there. You know what I mean? Hilarious.
Sometimes that's when you laugh your ass off.
Yes,
there's a lot of stuff that Linnea Quigley was in that did that. And she's like, yeah, if they were going to see me, I was going to get paid more. And she did.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's right. All right, you want to see that? This is how much.
Exactly. And it's funny because, but women who do that, I used to follow a publication online called The Rumpus. I haven't followed them in a long time, but they were like a literary publication, but that was a topic that came up an awful lot. Like you were talking about, like, I mean, and again, I don't necessarily want to say horror movie actresses or sex workers, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, it's like, there's this attitude of, women who use their bodies in a sexual way professionally, whether it be buried or, whatever, that somehow they're just, they're low rent, they're human trash, to this, that. And that kind of gets back into that whole theme of, that's another aspect of the dark feminine, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It's that idea.
It's not like it's not just Hellbender. That's the dark feminine, which it is, which is great. Which is excellent. And if anything is about the dark feminine, that is the dark feminine completely.
Right. Okay.
You can talk about like the dark feminine of the idea. What's the dark feminine is not the girl who had sex that got killed. The dark feminine could be the women that want to see her get killed.
Right.
she's breaking the rules. So it's not just the men. Like some women want to see that too, So I'm not saying that that's not there. I definitely should make sure I make that point. That it became there, and because there's a lot of stuff we want to see in horror movies, and we don't realize because we get some sort of a thrill about it. The problem is when it becomes a rules for the world, rules for society.
No, yeah, well, exactly. And I think it's kind of like, but it's interesting how that even with horror, because horror is something you think about is kind of going out into territory that people, like you said, it can be, again, like you're saying, okay, for your relationship to horror is that it was something that was like an escape for you, or that made you feel, it did, it had a positive effect on you. Okay. Like in terms of how you responded to it. There's other people who will say, oh, well, it's very triggery for me. And I don't, there's just certain aspects of it. But either way, it's kind of like horror is going into territory that is in some ways taboo, or in some ways like, just we're talking about, the worst parts of human nature, or we're talking about, what makes us afraid. It's kind of that stuff that's more shadowy. And I feel like with that, it's interesting to see how the feminine gets portrayed in that, because I'm always thinking, okay, well, on the one hand, there's some of these like sexual tropes and the things that we've been talking about. There's these monstrous woman tropes, and then there's this, but then there's like the actresses themselves and how, because also you got to remember there's the problem with people nowadays trying to separate fantasy from reality. You know what I mean? Yeah. And trying to separate the actor from the role, or trying to separate.
Yeah, a lot of horror people run into that big time because the fans can get intense.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just I don't know. I just find horror to be a really fascinating, it's something kind of on the edge, but at the same time, and it explores the things that both attract and repel us at the same time. So it's great material. But at the same time, it's like weird how it still manages to kind of incorporate some of those narratives. You know what I mean? Not all directors. And actually, that's the last question I wanted to ask you, because one other thing that we've talked about is the idea that what you and I've talked about, the idea that horror movie plots, sometimes people think, especially these B-rate kind of things, people will say, oh, this is just trash. There's no plot to it. There's nothing. And I think in some cases, they're more sophisticated than people are really seeing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that something, like you said, in some cases, it's absolute trash. And you either like say, no, I'm not into trash, or no, I'm not into trash tonight. Or sometimes you're like, hey, I want to watch some trash and eat a pizza, But
but some of them, I'm thinking, I don't know. I don't know if I'm thinking of like Sleepaway Camp or one of those kind of things, but there's just like.
Okay, so if I'm actually thinking about outside of the horror community.
Okay.
That's what I need to think of. And it's hard for me to get my head out of that because it's so into it. Yeah, I think that people sometimes are doing that. I think that they see that they're just trash. I've heard people say that, and they're not realizing that we're talking about coming of age, dealing with coping mechanisms, whether they're not. It's not a PSA for crying out loud,
right?
But it's storytelling, and it's the way storytelling can help us heal. We're dealing with trauma. We're dealing with memories of abuse, or people are unhappy, or depression, or all kinds of things come up, and they're symbolized or covered in these movies in a way that you don't recognize immediately. And I know that you're probably looking for examples, and I find my brain a little bit tiring, and I'm trying to figure out a way.
You don't have to have examples. It's fine.
Okay, good. But there have, been movies that I watched when I was a kid and I loved, and then I watch them later. I'm like, oh, okay. That made me feel less alone. That made me feel like less of a monster. Oh, that helped me deal with my my coming into my own queerness as bisexual. Like, oh, I related that way.
Right.
Oh, just, or like with Sleepaway Camp, they have my accent from although my accent is a lot less than it used to be, it still is to someone who doesn't grow up around it heavy, but it was like that when I was a kid. And or there, Sleepaway Camp is a hot button topic because it has a lot. It's a complicated issue, Sleepaway Camp, because it deals with gender and identity in a way that a lot of people find very problematic, and also some people find helpful. It depends. The best podcast I've ever heard done on sleepaway camp that tackles those issues is by the Horror Queers, and that's their name, at Horror Queers, and that is the best, the most really open, like really just discussion about people who felt damaged or helped by it, like giving like different sides of it. So that was one of the best I've ever heard. And my other favorite podcast, Bradley Gorley and Rust. I opened up another tab. You know, and female friendships in Halloween that people don't always pick up on, that Deborah Hill is writing about. You know, these from people she were friends that were complicated and can be jerks, but you know how you have that, like, you're still a kid, you're young and you're making mistakes. It's how you learn, you know, and just seeing like, oh, okay, well, other people have a friend that talks to them like that sometimes, or other people's friends are teasing them because they study, or things like that. Oh, okay, you know, or, you know, Lost Boys, and you know, lots of people have lots of theories and ideas that fit about what was going on with that, or you know, just that people are dealing with family issues, fear, obviously, gender issues, sexuality, other issues of dealing with sexuality in ways that they don't go there in regular movies and other movies. Socioeconomic issues that's brought up, people bring up about Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right.
You know, they're not clean cut kids in sleepaway camp. They're clean cut kids for the most part, and that's what he was going for in the first Friday the 13th. He mentions that they were a clean cut, like Pepsi generation. He said that himself, the director. You know, and I found that interesting in sleepaway camp. But I also liked, as a kid, and I also liked the interesting clean cut adult counselors in Friday the 13th. You know, and then you're dealing with this mother who's grieving,
right,
losing her mind, who's like, I am going to mess you all up because you let my son die. But she's not dealing with her own rage. She's not dealing with her own. She's not being helped either to deal with her own rage or her own trauma of losing her son. And you get the feeling like, well, how come she's the only one coming here? Was she a single mother? Was she on her own? Was she the only one? Did she have to work? And was she busy? And could she depended on the counselors to do a job that they didn't do? Right. You know, things like that, or you know.
Yeah, no, I think
I think because now I think about what happens to Tina. Spoiler alert for Batman Elm Street, the original. When Tina dies, her mother's away for the weekend with some guy, or the night with some guy. That brings up what you were talking about. But you know, I don't think that Wes Craven was doing that. I think he might have been playing with that. You know? Okay. I don't think he was saying that at all. You know, it's sometimes I think you're right. I think it's not just that the director is saying that. Sometimes they might be messing with others for thinking that. Right. You know, because Nancy's parents are divorced too. And, you know, but a lot of us were living lives like that, you know? Right, exactly. Living in homes where the marriages were miserable, unhappy. Like The Shining, you know? Yeah, right. Exactly. You know? And it's interesting. So it's Did that help at all? No, that was great. No, that answers my question very well. Thank you very much. No, I appreciate that. So probably, yeah. I mean, it's just kind of fascinating, and I think you bring up a lot of good points here, because I think when it comes to horror, it's like, you know, yeah, it does get into, it has some of these very realistic, real world kind of scenarios. Okay. And at the same time, you know, you have these extraordinary things happening, like, you know, like the grieving mother who goes out and kills all these people. Right. It's, you know, but then again, you're looking at those sort of these extremes in dealing with neglect, or dealing with perhaps, like, okay, if they're all supposed to be like good Pepsi generation kids, right? That they are in fact,
that tells you something about the Pepsi generation kids, right? Like, there's so many different ways you can look at it. There's so much depth to it. So people who just kind of see it as just sort of gratuitous slaughter, or there's a lot more going on there. And
sometimes there's not, but sometimes there is.
Mm-hmm. There's always something. I think even if it's only meant, I think even if it's meant to be gratuitous slaughter, I think sometimes, there's
it's about the idea of why do we want to see gratuitous slaughter, or
there's that too.
Gratuitous slaughter. It's to the point where, like in the Hatchet series, with Adam Green's Hatchet series, the thing he was going for with that was he felt like he wanted to make it fun. So he does so many gratuitous kills that they're ridiculous so that you'll laugh.
Right, now, exactly.
The funny thing is that he went through so many cuts with it, with the censor board, to get his movie a rating, that when they cut a lot of the blood and stuff, it made it more serious than funny. So it was actually more brutal and more mean. Whereas before, if you see the uncut, you have to buy them directly from him in his company. You can get them. It's not illegal or anything. It's just that's how you get it. And it takes a while because it's just basically him doing that with some people. It's not just him, but it's a smaller company. It takes a while. Right. And it's funnier because it's so ridiculous when you have it's got to be 14 gallons of blood coming out of someone who doesn't have that many. I don't think we have.
I don't think we have 14 gallons of blood. No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
I blame the brain fog. Okay, I have brain fog.
No, but your point's really well taken there, because there you go. There's something that's actually meant to be gory but humorous, and then it turns into something just cold and brutal, ironically in the name of protecting people from certain images, which is,
and it made it work. And the great stuff about it is Danielle Harris is in, she's not in the first one, but she's in the other. She's in 2 and 3, and she makes an appearance in 4, or if you want to call 4, but Victor Crowley, but that's a whole other story. Yes, Victor Crowley, you heard it. That's right. That's the name of his villain, Victor Crowley. That's meant to be funny, of course. And she's so tiny, and Kane Hodder's playing, who also played Jason and is known for playing Jason as a stuntman. He's playing Victor Crowley, and she's so tiny. At one point, she's just crawling up, and she's kicking serious butt. See, that's the thing. And now Danielle Harris was also in Halloween 4 and 5. And she's a little girl, but she is evading Michael Myers. She is kicking some serious butt. Some people may only know her. She played, she was on If They Saw Roseanne when they were younger. She played the next door neighbor who was basically hitting on David, which was Sarah Gilbert's boyfriend, Darlene's boyfriend at the time, And they might know her from that. But she's fantastic in that. And she's just, I love when they have her in really powerful roles, because I'm tiny too, so I enjoy that. Thinking I can kick monster butt,
You probably could. I have no doubt that you could.
Thank you. She's really brutal, and she's and in the Hatchet film, she's the only one that seems to understand what needs to happen and how it needs to go.
There you go.
And then she does there's a nude scene in that she does, and she's all covered in blood, and so she's showered down, and someone might call it gratuitous, but she wanted to do it. She did it. She's he wouldn't have had her do it. Adam Green is not like that if she didn't want to do it. And it's a great shot, and she loves it. She's proud of her body. She's a mom of 2, I think.
Right.
Let me tell you something, people. It's really, really hard to keep your weight down when you're tiny. Really hard.
Oh no, there's always
she's in incredible shape, and she's around my age, I think, and I could be wrong, but she's really, I find her character is very inspirational.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has all been a lot of really good stuff. Did you have anything else that you had that I didn't talk about that you had thought you might want to talk about in this, before we go? I mean, if you don't, that's cool too, but did you have anything else that you might want to address before we close out?
And I love what's going on now with, especially after seeing Hellraiser last night, and other things that I'm not thinking of at the moment, but the way they're changing up with the way they're representing gender, and the way they're representing the fluidity of gender and different ideas in horror films. They're really starting to pull it out with some great storytelling, and I'm really happy with what I'm seeing. It's really cool stuff.
That's great. Yeah, no, you're right. I do think that there is getting to be a shift in movies, maybe movies in general, but also in horror movies in particular.
Yeah.
It does seem like all of that, the culture of everything is shifting. So it's going to be really interesting to see where that
Yeah.
goes, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jeanette. I really appreciate
You're welcome. I wish
uh,
I could say more, but you're very welcome.
and what I'll do is I'm going to end up stopping recording, but stay on with me. So
Okay.
you don't have to go. But I just want to say thanks once again to Jeanette Torres Hanley for being with us today. And
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Chthonia Conversations. If you would like to become a supporter of the work that I do at Chthonia, please visit patreon.com/Chthonia and consider becoming a patron. The different levels and the different benefits of each level are described there. If you are interested at all in personal one-on-one coaching, tarot readings, or other kinds of sessions, please visit my website, liminalreiki.com. The name has changed to Transition Life Coaching, but still retains the original Liminal Reiki logo and URL. So you may check that out if that interests you. All of my work is available with publishing, podcasts, and also teaching. Scholars of the Borderland, which is where I provide classes on myth, religion, and other subjects. You can visit that and find all information about that at chthonia.net. If you don't follow me on social media, I'm Chthonia Podcast. 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Twitter and Instagram, and just Chthonia on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, check in, give a comment if you like. And hopefully I will see you again in the next episode.